Excellent. Hi. Wow, that's loud. Hello. I understand that the demonstrators next door were making equal noise earlier today. Thanks for fighting through that and making it to the pre-concert chat. My name is Christa Wessel. I'm the morning host at your favorite radio station, All Classical FM, 89.9. Yeah. Whenever I do these pre-concert conversations, and it's been, I don't know, 2 or 3, 4 years, I've lost track. You lose track when you're having fun. Some of my most cherished moments are when I get to do these with musicians of the symphony, because I feel like when you get to know the personalities making the music, you feel that much closer to the band that's making the noise, right? So this is Carin Miller Packwood, who's our principal bassoonist of the Oregon Symphony.
Hi, everybody. Good night. Thanks for coming.
You've been with the symphony?
For 3 years.
Okay. 3
years.
She's like, how do I talk into a mic?
It's my first time talking into a mic.
We're gonna start with a little biographical information about you, I think, and then move on to stories about auditioning for the symphony, what it's like to play in a symphony.
Okay.
She's a fascinating girl.
Okay, well, I'm a native New Yorker, and I grew up in Queens, which is a pretty multicultural place. I went to Fiorello H. LaGuardia High School, which is the Fame school. I don't know if anybody's seen that movie. And then graduated to go across the street to Juilliard. Took a year off to study with my teacher's teacher in Los Angeles at University of Southern California. Came back, finished at Juilliard, and then went off to Rice University to study with Ben Kamens in Houston, Texas.
Was it at the Fame school where you were like, I have to be a musician? At what point in your life did you suddenly realize not only that you needed to be a musician, but that the bassoon, sorry, of all instruments.
Yeah. It's the perfect Portland instrument. Keep Portland weird.
Just a show of, is there anybody who doesn't know what instrument the bassoon is, by chance? The really big bedpost looking thing? I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page. Well, there's one nickname for the bassoon, right? Called the burping bedpost.
Okay, that's the PC version. The PC version. Yeah. But yeah, the bassoon was very central in my life at a very young age. The first time I ever saw one, I was 8 years old, and something happened to me. It was just this laser beam between me and the instrument, and I just knew that I had to play it. I had been playing piano for quite some time. You know, when you grow up in a city like New York, you're exposed to opera and symphonic music and chamber music on a regular basis, and my mom is an opera singer, so I was exposed to a lot of opera from a young age. Yeah, so when I saw the bassoon, my mom took me back there, and I got to meet the bassoonist and hear a few notes, and pretty much sold. Every year from then until 13, I asked if I could play the bassoon, but I wasn't big enough.
How many years did you ask?
5 years.
So when you were 8, you asked, Mom said no. When you were 9, you asked?
My mom, you know, of course, ran to the nearest music school, Queens College, and asked if they had a bassoon that I could try. And, you know, I met the director, and he looked at me, and he was like, it's going to be a little while. You've got a lot of thumb keys. Your hands need to be a certain size.
But you knew all those years, the bassoon, not the flute, not the trumpet, the bassoon.
Yeah.
What is it about that tone, that timbre, or was it the shape? What do you think attracted you initially?
I think it must have been the tone. I mean, it's just has this really haunting, like just this archaic sound. Just doesn't sound like anything in the modern world.
That's an interesting description.
Yeah.
So Juilliard, undergrad, USC, graduate.
Oh, that was advanced studies.
Advanced
sort of a side note. Yeah.
And then on to Rice.
Mm-hmm.
And you have family, you told me, living in Chicago, so you've been all over the country, grew up in New York, LA, Houston.
Yeah, I mean, as a musician, you kind of follow your instrument. So it's taken me to some places that I wouldn't have otherwise seen. Like Shreveport, Louisiana was my first position. I was there for a year. It was a culture shock coming from New York. And from there I went to Jacksonville, Florida for 3 years and came here.
And Shreveport, Louisiana, Jacksonville, Florida, I think, southern part of the United States. You said culture shock, conservative. And I don't think of Shreveport as I don't know, maybe I'm just ignorant, a culturally robust city. Was it hard living, in Los Angeles and then coming to Shreveport, Chicago, then coming to Shreveport, New York, coming to Shreveport?
Yeah, I mean, it was very educational because when you grow up in New York, and this is not, no offense to New Yorkers, because I am one, but when you grow up there, you kind of think this is the center of the world. There aren't any other places in the world, and it's been really great to just live in all these places. And going to Shreveport, and they talk kind of like this, and I started saying "nan." So but there is a surprising amount of cultural interest in that city. For such a small city, it's kind of amazing that they were able to sustain a symphony orchestra for as long as they did. They've taken cuts now, but there's definitely interest in the city.
And in Jacksonville, you said you were there for 3 years. Mm-hmm. And you must have been auditioning during your tenure at these orchestras for other positions and maybe not so conservative a part of the country. Were you auditioning all over the place? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, the way it works is there's a central posting in the union paper every month, and you get to see if there are any openings. And since most symphony orchestras only have 2 to 3, some have 4 bassoons, there's really not a lot of openings. And from the time I won Jacksonville, I think there wasn't another opening for 2 years for a principal position that was better than Jacksonville. So
wow.
Yeah, more higher paying.
So when you saw that the Oregon Symphony was having auditions for a bassoonist in Portland, Oregon.
Yeah, I kind of was very driven to end up here after spending 4 years in the South. Nothing against the South, I enjoyed it. It just didn't resonate the same way that this city does with me.
So you'd been to Portland before the audition that you won, and you knew this was a city that you wanted to live in, and you come to the audition, and you're hoping, crossed with fingers, How do you keep from letting that adrenaline and all that hope and anticipation completely derail you on the audition process?
I would say this is the hardest thing about taking auditions, is that you have to really want it to do well at the audition, but you can't want it too much, or else you won't be able to focus. So when I took this audition, I stayed in my hotel room, and I did not leave until I had to for the audition. And I came straight here and was very prepared. One thing that I do to prepare for auditions that was very helpful is adversity training. When you come to an audition, you have about 5 minutes to prove yourself, behind a screen. There were 80 candidates when I auditioned here, and it's basically a book of the hardest excerpts, the hardest small clips that you'll ever have to play as a symphony musician. And they hear them one after another, 30 seconds, 10 seconds, can you do this, can you do that? And so you need to be in this sort of zone, this highly focused zone. And the way that you achieve that without breaking your focus when somebody coughs, or when the chair is too low, or when you hear pages turning or pens scribbling, the only way to be prepared for something like that is to practice adversity training in advance.
And what does adversity training consist of?
It's the most fun part of preparation, because you get to invite your friends to throw things at you and turn the lights off and blow your music off the stand. It sort of creates the most extreme distractions.
Meaning you're playing while people are throwing things at you?
You have to play a perfect audition through all of that. That's when I know I'm ready, if I can do that.
And so the way the auditions work in most orchestras, and I'm assuming here too, there's with 80 people auditioning for one spot, it's like a big, I don't know, big cattle call. You just come in, you play your excerpts behind a screen, right?
Right.
The people who are rating you don't see you for the first round or two?
Two rounds, yeah.
And then as you go through that first round and you make it to the semifinals, and then on to the final round, the screen is removed,
yes.
right? They see you.
Right. So it usually ends up, it's right under that overhang is where the screen is in the hall, and usually it ends up being, 80 people squeezed into 2 days, and then it's cut down to like 15 or 20 people, and you get to hear more of each person. And then finally they take the screen down, and the final 6 to 8 people get to play for, a full half hour.
Really?
Yeah.
A half hour?
Well,
straight?
Between 30 and 60 minutes is usually a final round.
And that's after already 2 days of high adrenaline, stressful performance. The third day, a half hour alone. You're so close to getting the job. You must be exhausted.
It is exhausting. I would say that the hardest part is to just really nail the finals and win the job. And
being so tired.
Yeah, being so tired and seeing the music director for the first time.
And you've been here with the Symphony?
For 3 years.
For 3 years. So on that final audition 3 years ago, your half-hour final audition, you take the reed out of your mouth, you put the instrument down. Did you know? Did you just know you'd played your heart out, you were going to win that job?
I knew at that moment that I had done the best I could have ever done. And that's happened to me once before in the finals of the Memphis Symphony, like 6 or 7 years ago, where I left the stage and I was like, that's it, I won this. And then they cut me. So I've learned not to completely trust that feeling, but I definitely poured everything I had into it here in the final round.
Well, we're glad you're here. What we've heard of you the last few years is extraordinary. I was telling somebody I was going to be doing these chats with Carin Packwood, the principal bassoonist, and they said, oh my God, she's amazing. She is a fearless player. And I don't know whether you feel fearless when you're back there. You sound fearless.
I think it's the New Yorker. I do. We're pushy folk.
To continue the thread of the auditions, you just ran some auditions. You just hired a second bassoonist for the Symphony as well.
This is a very exciting week. We are very, very lucky to have Adam Trussell join our bassoon section on second. Yeah, he played a wonderful audition. There were 70 people auditioning for his spot. So
it's remarkable. And this is his first concert series since his
very first performance as an official member. He's come to sub with us a few times, so some of you may recognize him.
And just like the auditions you were describing, the first 2 rounds were screened, and it wasn't until the final rounds that were unscreened that you realized that he was a friend of yours, right?
Yeah, you can ask my husband, but I literally ran in circles. I got so excited to see him there, because you never know, you can love what you're hearing from behind the screen and then come down and, think it's one person and it's completely not that person. Your ears are very different than when you see and hear at the same time.
Well, it's got to be fun, playing next to a friend.
It's a dream.
You guys went to school together,
We
right?
went to Rice together, for 2 years.
It's so cool.
Yeah.
Small world, small bassoon world.
Very small bassoon world. It's about 70 or 80 of us. No.
I imagine that one thing that is difficult in auditioning and performance, just in your life, are reeds. This is not a reed, but this is what reeds come from.
Yeah, I brought some things to show you guys. I don't know how many of you know this, but bassoon players make their own reeds, which is the little mouthpiece that goes on the end, and it's a double reed that we use, which is similar to the oboist. The two of us, we share the pain. And so this is what it looks like at the end. These little, I don't know how many can see this, but we probably have to make about 4 to 6 of these a week in order to have the that actually play well enough to use in the symphony.
What's that ratio again?
It's about 1 out of 5 that really works well enough. I mean, it's made out of this, which may look familiar. It's from bamboo. It's bassoon cane is made out of Argendonax bamboo, and we cut it down and gouge it out to look like this, and then we profile and shape it to look like this, and then it folds over and forms into this. And so that process takes, you know, probably hours of time when you compress it, but it has to be done in stages over the course of months so that the cane can cure. It's like wine or cheese, you know, it has to sit for a long time to cure into becoming what it's going to be.
So when I saw you had this in your hand backstage, this is bamboo, I'm like, you just go into people's yards and cut this down? And she said, yeah, I could do that, but it would, and then it takes 5 years to
age it.
To age?
Yeah.
And then once you've got the bamboo, you said each stage takes more time. And so you're, do you have any free time? Are you constantly making reeds?
It's kind of amazing how much time goes into making reeds. But, you know, I fortunately was able to buy a machine that saves a lot of time. So I do have free time now.
By machine, you're not like talking like about your reed making robot or something, right?
That would be lovely. I would give you a lot of money if you could make one of those. No, it's just a special kind of profiler that does a lot of the work you would do by hand for you.
I gotta hand it to you. You know, as a brass player myself, I just go out and buy a new mouthpiece or, you know, something easy like that where somebody else has done all the work.
Yeah, it's definitely a commitment. It takes a special personality to be willing to do that.
A little OCD or something.
Yeah, and you just have to really be in love with the sound of the instrument and really want to do it. And yeah, and like crafts is what I was going to say.
You don't have time to knit.
Yeah, if you're not handy at making things, yeah, it's hard to do.
From the story of your youth, when you were just kind of like laser beamed in on the sound of the bassoon as a young person, I'm going to transition to your work with young people in the community. I know you've been active with the Oregon Symphony and taking music into the schools and working with kids. You want to tell us a little bit about that? I know the Oregon Symphony has a robust education program, but I don't know how the individual musicians relate.
Well, I've been doing this thing called story time for a couple of years now, which is where you go into the libraries and you work with the librarians, and it's a cute way of just integrating musical sounds and musical improv into the stories. But recently, I don't know how many of you have heard of the Right Brain Initiative, but it's a program that is funding creativity in schools. A lot of the arts and physical ed programs have been cut in public schools, and they're sort of allowing schools that wouldn't otherwise be able to afford these things exposure. And so I went recently up to Woodlawn Elementary and worked with some first graders who had never obviously seen a bassoon in person before. And it's amazing how fascinated they are and just how curious. There were so many questions and such good attention.
Could you sense any of them like focusing in, like I want to play that bassoon, like you were?
Yeah, I'd say at least 3 of them asked me if I would buy them one. And I was like, I really wish I could, but maybe a recorder.
Oh, by saying that, you just reminded me of something. Your bassoon, to my eyes, and I'm relatively ignorant about the instrument, looks pretty traditional. It's a nice kind of reddish brown wood. But your new second bassoonist has a black bassoon. What's the difference?
It's actually really funny because Evan has sort of a purple-y bassoon. So the 3 of us have basically every kind you could have. There's really no difference. It's just the finish on the outside. That's pretty much it.
More.
Although there is a story about Fritz Reiner and the Chicago Symphony asking somebody to play it on he didn't like black bassoons and he asked it for it on another bassoon. But I don't think it makes a difference.
So we've covered the fact that all your spare time is spent with bamboo and reeds, but you must get out and do stuff in your small amount of free time. Want to share any of what you like to do to blow off steam?
Sure. One of the things that I love the most about being here is being a part of this group called the Kizi Cabal that my husband formed with a good friend of his, and it's a book club that reads books about the Pacific Northwest, and I think all of us are non-natives, and so it's just about us trying to figure out what this place is about, since it's a relatively young part of the U.S. Just learning about, the geography. I'm taking a geology class as well that's specific to the Pacific Northwest, just to learn about it.
Rocks.
Yes.
You're interested in rocks.
And volcanoes.
So we would be remiss, I think, if we didn't spend at least a few minutes talking about what is going to be happening on stage tonight. Pinchas Zuckerman is here, and he'll be playing his violin in a Haydn violin concerto, but also conducting the rest of the pieces. And I'm always endlessly curious about what it's like for the orchestra. You spend so much time under that very precise baton of Carlos Kalmar's, and you get accustomed to that. And then he's gone, and somebody else waltzes in. And what is that like? What is that like? Does it take some readjustment in the orchestra to get used to a new stick?
It really does. I would say, even though Pinchas has been here before, it's still, you just get so used to one way of following. And a colleague of mine said that it's very different when there is a musician on the podium, like an instrumentalist on the podium. They approach it from a completely different way. I don't know how many of you got to see Michael Francis when he was here, but he's a bass player in the London Symphony, and it was a similar feeling of not really being told what to do and having to sort of make chamber music amongst ourselves. And, at first it takes a little getting used to. We have to find, who am I playing with here? And, who do I listen for this downbeat? And, but the result is just a really high level of chamber music on stage, which I think is really appropriate for a piece like the Schumann.
Meaning he's a little bit more, maybe hands-off. I see Carlos a lot of the times really leaning in and cueing and making lots of eye contact.
Right. Carlos he's very intense, and he has a lot of ideas. And he really wants to convey those ideas through your instrument. And, it's a really intense and wonderful way of expressing. And this is just a totally different feeling. It's kind of like letting us have our ideas and express our ideas, and so they're both really enjoyable to work with.
And Pinchas Zuckerman won't even be on the podium for one of the pieces. When he's the soloist for the Haydn, he's standing down here, and his back is to you.
Yeah, will be to the orchestra. I don't play that piece, but it will be to the orchestra.
So you got the break on that one.
Yes.
Of the remaining pieces, I'm curious, just for you personally, the Rossini Overture, the Schumann Symphony, and the Tchaikovsky Romeo and Juliet. Are there specific bassoon demands in all of those pieces? One of those pieces, one of the pieces you're going to be more nervous about than the other?
Well, I have to say that one of the reasons I agreed to talk tonight is that it's one of the lighter programs for me. There's always something. There are always little clips here and there to focus on, and there are definitely challenging moments. But compared to the rest of the season, it's a little bit of a lighter show for me.
Okay, good. I wouldn't want to stress you out too
yes.
much. But this isn't too hard, right?
No, it's not bad.
Okay, good. We've got a couple of minutes remaining, and I am always curious to know whether audience members have any, weird insights or questions about what it's like to be an orchestra musician, bassoonist, what it's like to go to music school, to sit in an orchestra. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them. You okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Once you get the job, after you've surpassed those 80 people, Do they keep testing you every year? Do people get old and tired and stale on the job? Are there unions? How does that work so that you keep at the top of your game?
There's a process once you win an audition, the tenure process. And basically, the programmer works with music director to program pieces that may expose you more than otherwise. And, I'd say just playing the job is a test. When you're a new player, you have to find out if you can match with everybody and make sure you're listening well and that your timing is good. And so in this orchestra, it takes 2 years to accomplish tenure. And during that process, you meet with the committee and you meet with the music director, and they give you feedback about how to improve. So it's definitely a long time, which is appropriate considering that it's kind of like a musical marriage that you're coming into, And in regards to staying on top of your game once you have tenure, I think that a lot of that comes with the new players coming in. For instance, we've just hired this wonderful new flutist who's 21, and she's, she's in the midst of her studies. She's just really on the top of her game, and so just having her here is going to bring everybody else up and challenge us to play the way she does.
Good answer. Anybody else? Oh my goodness, there's one way over here. You can say the question and I'll repeat it so we can hear it. Is there any difference between the reed for an oboe and the reed for a bassoon?
There is, and if you asked an oboist, you would get a very different answer than if you ask a bassoonist. Oboe reeds are a lot smaller and thinner, and so they don't last very long. They last maybe a week at most, but I know some oboists that go through a reed every couple days, and so they have to make them way more than we do, but it also takes 15 minutes to 20 minutes to make an oboe reed. So, as a bassoonist, I would love to be able to just tie on a reed, clip the tip, and play a show, as opposed to the 6 months that I wait for mine to cure into their life. But at the same time, I like the fact that I make one and I know I have it for a few months.
Maybe time for one or two more. Anybody else have a question? Uh-oh. Our principal trumpet of the Oregon Symphony would like to ask our principal bassoonist a question. Yes, sir. Oh, that's a good question. As a New Yorker, how was it to go to Carnegie Hall in the spring?
It was a really moving experience for me and my family. I grew up going to those concerts all the time, and I was the biggest fan watching my teacher on stage there. So, of course, my mom came, my aunt came, my dad came, so I had a nice little fan club there, but it was an amazing experience. I also, growing up in New York, played with the New York Symphony, New York Youth Symphony, and so I have performed there before, but it was a very different experience playing with this group.
We'll stay here, okay, for another 2 years so you can experience that again when you go back to Carnegie Hall in 2013.
I plan to.
Good. Carin Miller Packwood is the principal bassoonist of our Oregon Symphony, and I can't thank you enough for taking the time to do this with me today.
Thank you, Christa. It was very
Enjoy
fun.
the show today. Okay.